talk gets a really bad rap, doesn't it? It's rare to hear anything positive said about small talk. But I want to invite you today to look again at the idea of small talk with me and discover why it can actually be something powerful and also something that maybe we should embrace rather than avoid. If you look up the definition of small talk, you will find something along the lines of polite conversation about unimportant or uncontroversial matters. But I've come to the conclusion that despite its name, small talk isn't something to be belittled. And the reason I've been thinking about small talk is because I've been on a bit of a journey with it myself. It all started a couple of years ago when my role at school changed quite significantly. I went from being a full-time class teacher in a primary school to taking on an assistant headship, which in my instance meant being out of class. And suddenly I had a very different challenge on my hands. I want you to take a moment to consider this question. What is a school? Now, everyone has different ideas about that. Some people might just immediately think of a building, a classroom, a lesson, a particular subject, a memory of your own. But really, a school isn't any of those things. It's not a building down the end of the road. A school is the community within it. It's the staff, it's the children, and the wider community of parents and carers, of course. At the heart of a good school is effective relationships. And at the heart of effective relationships are meaningful connections. And therein lies the challenge for teachers and leaders in school. You see, when I was in class full-time, I typically had 30 children in my class, and I was with them pretty much every day, all day. Now, while I won't say it was necessarily easy to build meaningful relationships with all of those children, the fact that we spent that long together was a really solid foundation for which, those relationships could grow on. But if you are a leader in a school who's out of class, or possibly a secondary teacher, you might find yourself in a position where you are working with many more children. And then the question is, well, how do you build and nurture relationships with so many children? To put it simply, when I became assistant head teacher, I had over 10 times the amount of children to develop relationships with in basically the same amount of time. And I knew that small talk was going to have to be a way of me doing that. But I didn't look at it as small talk. I decided to look at it as opportunities to build up these small connections over time. I wasn't going to aim for superficial conversation, but meaningful chats that would hopefully happen regularly. And what I did was I came up with, over time, I realized I had 5 ways that I kind of went about doing that. The first thing that I'd done is try and find opportunities to spend time with children and speak to them outside of lessons, outside of the classroom. And that's because it means the conversation can more easily steer away from just the lessons and the learning, and we can talk about more personal stuff. And for me, it's been lunch times. Sitting down regularly to have lunch with children has been some of the most enlightening times, really, that I've had in my whole career. The second thing I would say is that I avoid the question, how are you? Now, the thing about the question, how are you, is we are all, to different extents, programmed somehow to give a default answer of, I'm fine, or I'm good, and you, even when we're not. It's just kind of what we do. And for that reason, how are you can often be a bit of a micro-connection killer. So avoid that one. If I get asked how I am, I also really try as much as possible to pause and think and actually give an authentic but appropriate answer. So if it's a child asking me, I might say, yeah, I've had a really good morning this morning, I'm getting a lot done. Or if it's been a bad morning, I'll try and share that it's not been a great morning. Like, you know what, it's been stressful. The traffic on the way to work was really awful, so I didn't have a great start to my day. Keep it appropriate, but I want to model how to be authentic, that you don't just have to say, yeah, I'm good, when you're not. There's another question I avoid as well. And this is one that kind of gets asked a lot in schools, probably especially primary schools, is, what did you do over the weekend? What did you do over the holidays? What did you do last night? Now, the reason why I avoid that question is if you are a child who, for a whole load of possible reasons, doesn't ever really get taken anywhere or never really gets to do anything much, then that's a really loaded question. There's a lot of pressure to answer that question. So instead, I replace that question with an invitation to share news. I literally say to children, has anyone got any news to share? Because the thing about news is, it can be big, it can be small, it can be positive, it can be negative. It can really be anything. In my experience, news can be, Miss, my cat had kittens last night, or Miss, I'm feeling a bit sad because my older sister got married and she's moving away, and I don't know when I'm going to see her again. Or, Miss, I'm really worried about Sophie because she's posting stuff online that's making her look older than she is, and I'm worried about the people that she might be attracting to come and speak to her. And they're all true. They're all true things. But asking children to share news is a much more inclusive conversation than asking them to recount what they got up to last night or over in the holidays. But the last thing that I try and do really is avoid opening with questions at all. I try and share a little bit more about myself. It can be anything really. It can be a story from my childhood, my opinion on something that I did at the weekend, really anything that reminds them that I'm a person beyond a teacher. Because if I'm doing that, then I'm giving them the space to share things about themselves beyond just school life. And the true power of microconnections really is that they can act as stepping stones to deeper connections. And the truth is, if children can't talk to us about the small stuff, then it is a really big leap to ask them to talk to us about the big stuff. And my goodness, we need them to be able to talk to us about the big stuff. Should they find themselves in a position where they're feeling uncomfortable or scared or worried about something? Should a vulnerable child who has been through something traumatic or suffered abuse get to the point where they feel safe enough that they want to start disclosing to somebody they trust, I need them to know that the pathway to me is open. And as the designated teacher for looked after children in my school also, I can tell you that if they get to that point, they will walk down that path. And the reality that I want to leave you with really is that all of this stuff about connections, it's not just about being a teacher and working with children. It's important to the relationships we all have, our colleagues, our friends, our family. In a time when we are all ever busier, we can all try and aim to make even the briefest of moments more meaningful. Thank you.